Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu often used humour to deliver important messages both during global activism or as part of his church sermons. They were always followed by a warm smile and a jovial laugh that inspired hope. That's certainly the description from so many people. So to talk more about the liberating humour of the Arch, we're joined now on the line by Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, who's the Vice-Chancellor Designate at Tshwane University of Technology. Prof, it's great to talk to you this morning as we continue to reflect on the life and legacy of the Arch. And, you know, certainly his humour and his laughter are some of the things that really stand out as we remember the Arch this morning.
Oh, yeah, certainly, Michelle. I think that friend and foe of the Arch will tell you that his sense of humor was amazing. But the fact of it, the fact that this man who lived through the most difficult period in the history of South Africa, he saw the destruction of Sharpeville, he saw the Sharpeville massacre, he went through the Rivonia trial, the flowering of the black consciousness, the Soweto 76 student unrest. But this man, having seen so much destruction and pain, would resort to humor. That fact in and of itself is just amazing. You wouldn't think that humor would be part of the arsenal of weaponry that he would use, especially among the downtrodden, the very people who were upset and had done by. And yet, in Soweto, in Alexandra, everywhere, you would find him poking fun at people and at himself half the time.
Yeah. Prof, where did the Arch, you know, how did he tap into that humour, given what he's lived through in our country? Where did that joy and that humour, a seemingly endless well of humour, come from, as you say, given all of the difficulties he's seen unfold in South Africa?
I think part of it is that he picked it up from the people that he led, because much of the humor that he used is the humor that people were already using. So, for example, the Van der Merwe jokes, that's a South African thing. He simply picked it up from among the people. That's the one thing. The second source of his humor is, of course, his own personal story, his biography. I mean, he would make fun about his height, make fun about his nose and the simplicity of his name. That's another source of his humor. The third, of course, is the Bible. How he went to the Bible, retold the stories of the Bible in the most humorous ways. I mean, he tells the story of Adam and Eve. And you know how Adam was put to sleep, and when he woke up, he saw this delectable, delicious being, and he said, "This is what the doctor ordered." You know, so the way he retold biblical stories, or the story of Mary and Joseph not finding a place in the inn, and Joseph begging and saying, "Please, my wife is about to have a baby, open for us." And the hotel keeper said, "You are late, it's not my fault." And Joseph said, "It's not my fault either," you know, because Joseph, you know, so the way he retold biblical stories, the Bible was a very important source of the humor that he told. And of course, the politics of race in South Africa were also a very important source of his stories. He told many stories that made fun of black and white people failing to relate to one another. I mean, I can give you many examples of those.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, Prof, you know, the fact that the Arch did have this wonderful sense of humor, he did have this joyful personality, it didn't mean that he shied away from the most difficult conversations. It didn't mean that he wasn't critical and hard when he needed to be.
In fact, sometimes he used the humor to tell the hardest truths. So, for example, he tells the story of how this South African Van der Merwe was feeling unhappy that the Russians and the Americans were making all the scientific discoveries while he wasn't making any. So he decided he's going to start a project to go to the sun. And then people told him, but the sun will burn you before you reach it. And he said, don't worry about it, we'll go at night. You know? Now, and that tells you that he was already passing a message that, you know, you who are leaders of apartheid are not as smart as you think you are. We could do better together. You know, so he did tell a lot. I mean, even, for example, between Africans and Africans, it tells the story of how a South African was making fun of a Zambian, saying, why do you have a ministry of oceans and fisheries when you don't have the sea? And the Zambian retorted and saying, why do you have a ministry of justice when you don't have any justice in your country? You know? So he did use humor to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth was biting and offensive. So some people wouldn't be able to laugh at some of the jokes that he made because they were intended to offend, they were intended to evoke a response and to, of course, to make the difficult point.
Yeah, and to hold that person to account ultimately. Prof, what do you reckon it was about the arch? As you say now, sometimes that truth that he was telling was biting, and it was offensive, and it was meant to be. But what was it about the arch that he could hold world leaders to account in this very, very blunt and forthcoming way?
You know, my theory is that his humor was intended to humanize. You know, often humor is intended merely to belittle and to make people feel small, but his was intended to humanize. Humor was for him the way to reach out to the innermost core of his fellow human beings. And in that way, he was able to reach many people. So, for example, he was a radical thinker. Think about this. When he says, if God is homophobic, I don't want to go to heaven. That's what he says. Now, that is a very powerful message. And of course, he was fearless. Because to say that to a church that was largely unwilling to welcome people from the LGBTI plus community, to say that to a world which is afraid to talk straight to China, for example, he would speak against China, he would speak against the USA, he would speak against apartheid, and in that way, I think he earned the respect of the world.
Yeah, he was a thorn in the side of the National Party under apartheid. He was a thorn in the side of the African National Congress during democracy, saying that he'd actively prayed for the downfall of the ANC, actually.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you know, that great speech he made, that press conference he made, I think it was 2016, where he's warning the ANC. Now, of course, he has been misquoted. Someone was interviewing me the other day, and they said the Arch said South Africa was better under apartheid. And he never said that, really. What he said was, if the democratic government does not listen to people, it will fall in the same way that the apartheid state fell. It will fall in the same way that Muammar Gaddafi fell. And he gave examples from all over. He never said we were better off under apartheid, but he did say, if you continue to make the mistakes you are making, if you do not do justice and become champions of justice here at home and abroad, you may face the same consequences that all states that do not do that face. That's the point that he made, and he kept making this point to the ANC. Already in 1997, 1998, he was critical of government when parliamentarians voted for high salaries for themselves. He started talking about the gravy train at that time already. And of course, right through from Mandela to Zuma he was critical of the government whenever he thought government was not doing the right thing.
And in fact, Prof, there's a quote from the Arch that comes up, just speaking to the point that you're making just now, where he says, forgiving is not forgetting, it is actually remembering. Remembering and not using your right to hit back. It's a second chance for a new beginning, he says. And the remembering part is particularly important, especially if you don't want to repeat what happened.
Memory was very important for the Arch. Remembering was a very important aspect of his theology, of his philosophy. But here was the key thing. It is not merely remembering, it is how you remember that matters. So for him, you remember the past by wearing the lenses of forgiveness. In other words, you look back at the pain, but you are wearing the lenses of forgiveness. That was his trick. That's how he managed to overcome his anger against his own father. That's how he managed to overcome his anger against white people in this country who have given him a lot of pain in his own personal life as well as in the lives of many of his compatriots.
Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, it's been a great pleasure talking to you this morning as we continue to just reflect on the incredible legacy of the Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. Thank you for joining us. Professor Maluleke is Vice-Chancellor Designate at Tshwane University of Technology.